This morning, British servicemen and women are on high alert in the Middle East. So far, the only shells fired by our troops this weekend were blanks, marking the King's birthday yesterday. But it may not stay that way. The Middle East is tense as a dangerous conflict flares up once again. Israeli forces are targeting Iran's nuclear program, claiming that Tehran's broken its promise to develop it for civilian uses only. Tehran is firing back. The Ayatollahs say that Israel is the aggressor and that the United States is pulling its strings. Britain's called on both sides to cool it. But right now, nobody looks ready to talk. We'll get immediate reaction from the government here as we speak to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and hear from the Conservatives' Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. I'll be joined live by the former Foreign Secretary who signed the last deal with Iran for the UK, Lord Hammond. Plus, with us throughout the show, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry, the former Defence Secretary and now Dame Penny Mordaunt, and host of the Crisis Room podcast and Sunday Times columnist, Mark Urban. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Iran has launched a wave of airstrikes on Israel for a second night, hitting cities along Israel's coast, including Tel Aviv. At least 8 people have been killed, according to Israeli media, with more than 100 people injured. That followed ongoing attacks by Israel on Iranian nuclear and missile sites. Donald Trump claims that the United States had no knowledge of the Israeli attacks and says he can easily get a deal between the two countries to end the conflict. But he warns that if Iran attacks America in any way, he will deploy the full might of the United States armed forces at levels never seen before. Well, let's get the very latest from the region now. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is live in Jerusalem for us. Ali, what are you seeing there right now?
Well, right now it is calm, as it has tended to be during the daytime. I think it's probably because the Iranians don't want to fire off missiles at Israel during daylight hours because it's far easier to detect them. So they tend to wait until darkness before hitting Israel. It's very quiet. It's Sunday here, but that's the start of the working week. It is very quiet. Schools are closed. A lot of the businesses and restaurants and shops, etc., are closed. Gatherings are being limited. You know, people are, in a degree of shock here after 3 nights now of pretty much sleepless nights as this war enters its 3rd day. And what's happened last night has been particularly heavy. I felt that the number, and we'll wait and see whether the IDF confirm this, I felt that the number of ballistic missiles fired at Israel last night was perhaps less than the previous night. There were only 2 waves, around 3:30 in the morning as opposed to 4. But the damage done has been really significant. 10 dead, 4 of them up north, close to Haifa, 6 in the Tel Aviv region, approximately 200 injured. There is still work going on to try and find some people they think are trapped in the rubble. And so whilst, if I'm right, the number of missiles that Iran fired might have been less, and perhaps that points to their inability to fire more, the damage done over the last night has been far greater than anything that Israel has experienced.
Ali, thank you for that update. I think we're coming back to a little while later, before 9 o'clock, and no doubt you'll be able to talk to us a bit more about what you think the background is. So thank you for that for the moment, and we'll speak a bit later. Let's get some immediate reaction to those events in the Middle East now from the government. Just a few moments ago, I spoke to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Chancellor, as always in these situations, is there anything you need to tell us about the safety of British citizens in the war zone, whether that's in Israel or Iran or in the region generally?
The Prime Minister announced last night that we are sending assets, including jets, to the Middle East to ensure that our assets and our people in the region are protected, and also to support our allies. Obviously, it's incredibly concerning about what's happening in the Middle East for people who are there, but also because of the global ramifications potentially. And that's why the Prime Minister and our allies are urging for de-escalation. That is what is really critical right now. Calm heads and a de-escalation of the conflict. And the Prime Minister is now at the G7 summit in Canada with our key allies around the world, and this will be front and centre of those discussions.
When you say we've put assets into the area, does that mean that we're at war?
No, it does not mean that we are at war, and we have not been involved in these strikes or this conflict. But we do have important assets in the region, and it is right that we send jets to protect them, and that's what we've done. It's a precautionary move, and at the same time, we are urging de-escalation. The Prime Minister has spoken to the Prime Minister of Israel. Our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has spoken to his Iranian counterparts, and we've been very busy these last 48 hours or so urging restraint, and that's what the Prime Minister will be doing in Canada this week.
We are allies of the Israelis. If they were to ask us to deploy our assets in support of their operations, would we?
Well, as I said, we haven't been involved, and I'm not going to get involved in sort of operational decisions for the future. This is a fast-moving situation. Israel has every right to defend itself. We also are very concerned about Iran's nuclear deterrent.
What's the point of being an ally if you don't come to your allies' aid when they ask?
Well, the US have also been clear they haven't been involved in these strikes to date. We have in the past supported Israel when there have been missiles coming in. I'm not going to comment on what might happen in the future, but so far we haven't been involved, and we're sending in assets to both protect ourselves and also potentially to support our allies.
Well, exactly. But as a point of principle, and I understand you don't want to talk about anything operational, we can't predict what's going to happen in the future. But as a point of principle, we are allies to the Israelis, and there could be a situation here where we are asked to deploy assets in their support, and we would have to consider that, wouldn't we?
Well, what we've done in the past, as you know, Trevor, is help protect Israel from incoming strikes, so a defensive activity.
So I'm just simply saying...
I'm not going to rule anything out at this stage, Trevor. It's a fast-moving situation, a very volatile situation, but we don't want to see escalation. We want to see de-escalation because it's a very volatile part of the world. And, of course, what happens in the Middle East, as we know, often has repercussions around the world. We've already seen in the last few days, for example, oil and gas prices begin to go up. That has consequences for people here in the UK. And so we do have an interest in de-escalation in the region, and that is what we are urging.
You, of course, have to think about the economic consequences of all of this. What happens if they close the Straits of Hormuz, which is one of the most important passages for commercial traffic in the world, and on which much of what we buy in the shops and so on depends? Mm-hmm.
So there are two sort of immediate concerns. The first is around oil and gas prices, and over the course of this week, oil prices have gone up by just over 10%. They're still down compared to a few months ago, but of course, we're keeping an eye on that. And at the same time, as you say, trade routes are very important through the Middle East, and we've seen disruption there in the past, partly because of the Houthi attacks, for example, and so that is a cause for concern. But one of the reasons why...
How worried are you about all of that?
Well, look, it's very early days and things are moving quickly, but when we urge for de-escalation in the region, that is in part because of the lives at risk, and we saw more loss of life overnight, but also because what happens in the Middle East affects us here at home. And it's why in the spending review this week, we invested heavily in our defence to keep our country safe and protect ourselves and our allies. And it's also why in the spending review this week, we increased investment in our energy security, because we are very dependent on imports of energy. And what we did this week was invest in Sizewell C, in small modular reactors, and also in renewable energy in the UK. Let me just finish this point. Energy security is national security. The previous government left us exposed to global events in energy markets. We are trying to become more resilient, more self-sufficient in energy.
I want to come to the spending review, but just one final thing on the issue of Iran and Israel. The Israelis have made it pretty clear that part of what they want is regime change in Tehran. Do we support that?
Well, I've got no time for the Iranian regime, for the repression of their own people, and we have serious concerns, which we've expressed on a number of occasions, about the Iranian nuclear programme. But we want to see de-escalation at the moment. We are not trying to ramp up the rhetoric. We are very concerned about the developments in the Middle East because of the implications here at home, but also the implications for the Middle East.
All right. Last night, Prime Minister said that there would be a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. It's going to focus on the race of the perpetrators. When do you expect that to start?
There will be the publication of the Casey review this week, and as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we want to get going with that as quickly as possible. Now, in the last year, since we came to office, when we came to office, there were over 200 outstanding recommendations from the J review, which was a national inquiry which took 7 years. The previous government had not been implementing those. We've been cracking on and implementing those. Convictions are now at a record high, and the Prime Minister asked Louise Casey to do a rapid review to see what else we could do. She has said to make sure that these local inquiries that are up and running work properly, that we have a national inquiry alongside that, and we are accepting all of Louise Casey's recommendations, including that one.
Prime Minister says he's read Louise's report from cover to cover, read every word of it, and that has apparently changed his mind. What is in her report that we did not know before that justifies a change of heart?
Well, we'll see the report this week. I haven't yet had a copy of the report. Well, look, we'll see the report this week, but the Prime Minister is saying, even ahead of that, that he will accept all of her recommendations, including the need for a national inquiry to sit alongside those local inquiries that are already ready. But let me just say this, Trevor, because with local inquiries, they don't have the statutory powers, and we need to make sure that people are compelled to give evidence. That's one of the reasons, because people are not coming forward to give that evidence.
But he, the Home Secretary, Safeguarding Minister, were all pretty clear and specific that they did not think such an inquiry was needed. So they must have been wrong, or they have found out something they did not know before. Which is it?
Well, Louise Casey, when she started this review for the Prime Minister, said herself that she didn't think there was a need for a national inquiry. She has left no stone unturned in her rapid review, and she has now changed her mind and believes that there should be a national inquiry. And the Prime Minister has got huge respect for Louise Casey, has followed her recommendations, and there will be that national inquiry. But that's going to be published this week, and the Home Secretary will speak to it.
So when it's published, will there be some sort of apology to all of those who were criticised by ministers as talking total nonsense, I'm quoting here, and misinformation, and those who were more or less accused of racism for raising this issue?
The most important thing is getting justice.
Well, no, this is what I've asked you is the most important thing.
Well, no, Trevor.
For many people who were criticised in that way.
Trevor, what is the most important thing here?
Of course, it's the position of the victims.
It is the victims, and it's not people's hurt feelings about how they've been spoken about. The most important here is the victims of these evil crimes.
But the reason it matters is because those people who raise this issue on behalf of victims who cannot often speak for themselves were accused by government ministers of, quote, total nonsense, misinformation and racism. So actually, surely that's important as well.
I think the most important thing is the victims themselves. And we have been busy as a government this last year implementing the 200 or so recommendations of the previous inquiry. Convictions are now at a record high. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is always focused, whether it's on this or other issues, on what practical things can be done to make sure that justice is always delivered.
But you see, this has to be dealt with properly to make sure this doesn't happen in future. Presumably there are going to be some lessons learned here about the way ministers respond to these issues.
Well, the Prime Minister, when he was Director of Prosecutions, he brought the first convictions in Rochdale. Louise Casey, when she did her review in Rotherham, uncovered what was going on there. So I think the Prime Minister's got a good track record in this area. The first convictions, he, unlike the previous government, is implementing the recommendations of the J Review. And now we will go further and have alongside these local inquiries and national inquiries. So we do learn lessons for the victims.
I'm only interrupting you because I want to get on to talk about your business, which is, of course, a spending review. Reversal of policy on the winter fuel allowance. You said all along that you wanted to protect the poorest, the most vulnerable. We understand that you now intend that 75% of pensioners are going to get the allowance. How do 3/4 of pensioners become the poorest and most vulnerable? Surely you've just given in to the noisy campaigners rather than focusing the money on those who really need it.
When we made the changes, we made the principal case that it should be a means-tested benefit, that we shouldn't be paying out winter fuel payment to better-off pensioners. Since then, we have made a decision now to increase it so that 75% of pensioners get it. And we've set that at £35,000, which is just below average earnings in this country. And it means when we looked at all the poverty impacts, no pensioner in poverty would be impacted by this. So that is the reason for the choice of £35,000.
Yeah, but this is a bit weird, because you said that you want to focus on pensioner poverty. You set this at 35,000, which basically means pretty much everybody who is a pensioner gets it.
Well, 75% will, 25% won't. So that saves us around £450 million a year compared to what we inherited. So this is a big saving because we're no longer paying the winter fuel allowance.
Billion, I think, right?
Well, yes, that's what we'll be paying, but we're not going to be paying out £450 million. So for parties like the Tories and Reform who say it shouldn't be means-tested, they need to say where that £450 million difference would come from. So it's a principled case that the benefit should be means-tested. I don't think it is right that ordinary working people on low wages with costs of rent and mortgages and often childcare have to pay the winter fuel allowance for the wealthiest pensioners. Under our new rules, they won't be doing so.
Can I ask you, was it worth it going through all of this pain only to reverse yourself for whatever it is, not even a few hundred million?
Well, I mean, when I became Chancellor last year...
450 million, right?
When I became Chancellor last year, I faced a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Over £6 billion of that was undisclosed asylum costs. And we had to get a grip of the situation. I was told when I became Chancellor that if we tried to issue those additional government bonds, the cost of borrowing would increase and we would find ourselves...
This is the threat of the run on the pound and all that.
There were very serious concerns at the Treasury and the Debt Management Office about the level of our borrowing and the additional borrowing that hadn't been disclosed to financial markets. So I had to take a very rapid decision.
But the fiscal position now is worse than then. I mean...
Well, no, Trevor...
Why are you making a...
No, Trevor,
because
now everything is funded and costed, and the Office of Budget Responsibility say that we will be meeting our fiscal rules 2 years early, in 2 years' time, of both balancing day-to-day spending with tax receipts and also getting debt down as a share of GDP. We've dealt with that black hole. And so, look, I'm not immune to the pressures on public finances. Of course I'm not. That has involved a number of difficult decisions on tax, spending and welfare. We took those decisions in the budget last year to put our public finances on a firm footing, and we've now achieved that.
Look, we could talk about that all day long, but the most important thing I think that emerged from the spending review was that your two big priorities, billions on infrastructure, billions of money for the NHS. The plan that you've put out in Blue Book says investment must come with reform. What are changes that you're going to demand of doctors and nurses in return for the 29 billion extra to the NHS?
Yeah. So look, the day after the spending review, I was in Derby at the local hospital there, and the chief executive said to me, "You've done your part. You've given us a settlement which we recognise was not easy to afford, and we now need to deliver against your plans to reduce hospital waiting times." And they were determined as a team to be able to achieve that. One of the things that we're doing to help them achieve that is investment in new scanners, diagnostic equipment, and also ensuring that fewer wards are taken out of action because of the dilapidated condition of our hospitals. So as well as the day-to-day funding, we're also putting that capital investment so that we can use more of our hospital estate.
Can I just put one thing to you, which, I mean, I wish we had more time, but let's just deal with the underlying issue that you've got, which is one of productivity.
Yes.
The increase of funding right across public services is predicated on savings in the health service, something like 17 billion over 3 years.
Yes.
Now, this is productivity, as you can see, and the line I want to draw your attention to, public sector productivity has declined and continued to decline over the years. Now, you're giving the public sector money. I mean, it's an extraordinary, I think, shocking graft that. You're giving them a lot of money. What are you going to do to increase productivity? Because your plan and your fiscal rules depend on getting...
No, absolutely. So we did the first zero-based review in the spending review for 18 years last week. That means going through line by line what government is spending on. And the Department of Health, like every other department, identified 5% of their costs that they're going to take out of the system. That includes things like getting rid of NHS England, because that
it's not going to go into swallowed up by pay rises, as it was last year?
No, we are both years accepting the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies. And one of the reasons why we've managed to reduce the number of people on waiting lists by 250,000 in the first 10 months of this Labour government is because doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals have got back to work. And that is really crucial. We saw the data come in on Thursday morning that showed a further fall in the number on waiting lists. That's only been possible because of a combination of the investment we're putting in, but also the reform we're putting into the health service. And you saw in that chart a bit of a bounce back in NHS productivity, but we need to see more. Absolutely, we need to see more. And Wes Street and the Health Secretary is very focused on that.
Chancellor, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry, the former Defence Secretary and now Dame Penny Mordaunt, and the host of the Crisis Room podcast and Sunday Times columnist, Mark Urban. Mark, is this a skirmish or is this more serious?
Oh, no, this is what people have been expecting for 20 years between Israel and Iran. It's a major trial of strength between the two of them. I think the key factors are, you know, what the military call escalation dominance, which at the moment the Israelis seem to have, which the way that works is that if, for example, the Iranians think we've got to raise the pain level, start hitting Israeli civilian targets, then the Israelis can go much further with Iranian oil facilities, things like that, noticing the Chancellor's fears about oil prices. There's that. And then there's the question of who can endure this for the longest. And that's where I think some of the initial advantages that the Israelis have had will start to disappear over the coming days, because the Iranians, you know, they're in a really serious bind here, and with the hints of regime change, they've got to hit back, they've got to make it look like they're doing some damage, and therein lies the risk that in doing so, they do create escalation. That causes issues either with the oil price or indeed in the Straits of Hormuz, something like that, which then brings in wider powers like the US.
Yeah, we're getting reports that there's an oil depot that's been hit in Tehran, and maybe we might see some pictures of that later. But we don't know that that's
I'll jump
real,
in,
but...
Trevor. I think that's a sort of signalling strike, which is, yes, we can go for your civilian infrastructure and oil infrastructure, but the really big thing is the Kharg Island oil terminal in the Gulf. as long as they don't go for that, they haven't really switched to the oil target.
Penny, should we be worried about being sucked into a hot conflict?
Well, I think this is a huge test for our nation and America in particular. The government's been very clear that it's calling for de-escalation and trying not to get dragged into this. But I think inevitably, the longer this continues, the harder that line is going to be to hold, because we will have interests in the outcome of this. We will have interests in the area directly concerned. And there are very serious implications. There are implications for Ukraine in all of this. Right at the time, the US Senate is trying to apply pressure on Russia and trying to increase the financial pressures on him. The situation that may unfold with regard to oil is completely counter to that. And there's also the unintended consequences, because Iran might have a plan of what it's going to do. We know from previous strikes that it's carried out, its weapons go AWOL. There are quite often faults with them, and there could be some very serious unintended consequences. But what you're seeing now is our armed forces being deployed to cope with all eventualities. But I think the posture from us is very much defensive.
So, Emily, what do you make of it? Our position is calm down, everybody, but how long can that hold?
So, what I make of it is that Netanyahu's been talking about this for 20 years. So it's a really well-planned attack. And obviously over those 20 years, a lot of things have happened. So you remember Cathy Ashton was leading the negotiations, the Obama agreement, which was an agreement with the Iranians on how they could stop how we could agree with them that they were going to stop this
so-called
program.
JCPOA.
That's it.
She was here last week talking about it.
And then Netanyahu lobbies against that, and when Trump comes in, Trump says, "Oh, I'm walking away from it. This is a terrible deal." And now he's supposed to be negotiating a new deal, which looks very much like Cathy Ashton's deal. And in the middle of that, the Israelis bomb again. And you wonder what is going on here. And are they really expecting the Israelis, to be able to get rid of the nuclear enrichment facilities, which, Mark knows better than I do, a lot of it is kind of in mountains, like a sort of Dr. No type kind of. So how will the Israelis get there? They don't have these bunker busting, whatever it is that people talk about.
Americans have that.
Only the Americans have that. So are they trying to bring the Americans in, or is it not really about that? Is it about regime change? Is that what they're doing? In the middle of negotiations between America and Iran, Israel comes into the middle of it and goes, actually, do you know what, guys? You're going. I mean, really?
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister was, I think, as clear as anybody could be in his broadcast a couple of nights ago, in which he spoke directly to the Iranian people and said, essentially, get rid of these guys.
And no matter how angry the Iranian people may be at their regime, and I know that, it's thought sort of at least half of them certainly are, why would there be a change of regime on the instruction of the Israelis? This.
Well, I think we also just have to bear in mind that there have been independent reports to say the Iranians were reaching what they call breakout capability, that there was an imminent threat appearing on the horizon. Some of the early language that the Israelis were using were also talking about an imminent attack as well. So I think the timing, it's not just what Emily has said. I think there is another factor in this, which Israel is responding to. It could see that the threat was not tolerable, and therefore that was one factor in why it decided to act now.
That's a really important fact, actually. And overnight, the Israelis have briefed out to their media all sorts of detail, alleging that the Iranians had started to go the nuclear weapon route, not just enriching uranium, but the weapon route, starting a few months after the 7th of October 2023 events. Now, of course, a lot of people will go, shades of Iraq, WMD and all the rest of it. Is this believable? I think that's going to be one of the big things over the next few days. To what extent do they take allied governments into their confidence about their intelligence that the Iranians were indeed embarked on a nuclear weapon programme, that had started, several months ago, And do those allies find that credible? I mean, I think that'll be a fascinating theme over the coming days. The French seem to have sort of hinted at something along these lines on Friday. President Macron hinted that the Iranian nuclear program had reached a critical stage that required something to be done.
This was a report of the IAEA, which is the nuclear watchdog. Who actually, essentially, will call the shots on this? We're going to come back to that because actually we've hit the clock. It is 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Israel has carried out further attacks on Iran, claiming that it's hitting nuclear and missile facilities. In response, Iran has carried out another wave of attacks overnight, including on Tel Aviv, where 8 deaths have been reporting. In the last hour, the Chancellor told this programme that UK military assets are moving into the region and could potentially support our allies there. Now, the last time there was an international deal with Iran to monitor and contain its nuclear programme, the JCPOA, I think it's the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, it was signed for the UK by our Foreign Secretary then, Lord Hammond. And I can speak to Lord Hammond now live. Good morning, Lord Hammond.
Good morning.
You spent a lot of time with Iranian leaders, talking to them. How would you rate their desire and capacity for an all-out war with Israel?
Well, I think the Iranian regime today is a very different one from the one we were dealing with in 2015, because it's been severely weakened by the events of the last 18 months, 2 years. It is now alone and largely friendless in the region. And I think it's much weaker than it was. So the discussions, the talks that have been going on between Iran and the US, I suspect had a different flavour to them, where the regime in Iran has moved its focus from exporting its ideology to surviving. And like all autocratic regimes, when the chips are down, the number one priority invariably becomes survival of the regime. And, I would have expected that the Iranians would be keen to do a deal with the Americans. It may be that that is not inconsistent with stepping up pressure by moving to breakout point and weaponization in their program on the ground. But one person who will not be keen for a deal between the Americans and the Iranians, any more than he was keen for us to do the JCPOA deal in 2015, is Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israelis do not want to see deals done. They didn't like the JCPOA. They wouldn't like a deal now between Iran and the US. The Israelis want to see a more permanent and, as they would see it, more sustainable and guaranteed end to the Iranian program through its dismantlement, but either by military action or by regime change.
Is it your opinion, though, that the Americans can, if you like, bring the Israelis to the table, or can the Israelis simply stand in the way of a new deal?
I think the Israelis are standing in the way of a new deal. I think the actions that have been taken make it virtually impossible for the regime in Iran to reach a deal with the Americans and to survive. Their credibility at home would be shot. And the regime itself is riven with tensions. There are many different factions within the Iranian regime, many different focuses of power, if you like, IRGC, military, the supreme leader, etc. So I think that the Israeli preemptive attack has effectively put paid, at least for now, to any prospect of a deal to halt Iran's nuclear weapons program.
So with the Israelis in one corner saying that they will strike every potential site of danger and threat, the Iranians in a situation where essentially doing anything other than escalation, risk humiliation, how can it possibly be resolved?
Well, it's going to be very difficult to de-escalate the situation, and obviously that is what everybody is now trying to do. I rather agree with the comment that Emily Thornberry made a few moments ago. I very much doubt that the Israelis have got the capability to permanently destroy Iran's deep underground nuclear facilities. So they will have the ability, by destroying overground infrastructure, to slow down the program, perhaps to disrupt it for months or even years. But that isn't quite the same as permanently destroying the underground facilities. I don't think that Israeli action alone, unless it leads to regime change, is going to permanently take Iran out of the nuclear game. And clearly, Netanyahu has effectively recognized that by calling for regime change as apparently the principal target of the Israeli action.
I've read that the one, if you like, halfway house that the Israelis might be pursuing, and I'll ask Mark Urban about this in a moment, that they may not be able to destroy the underground site, but what they might be able to do is to deny the Iranians access by destroying the roads and the infrastructure that would take troops and the scientists and so on into those sites.
Yeah, as I said, I think they can damage, slow down, maybe temporarily halt the program by destroying overground infrastructure. But I mean, the Iranians have been planning for this attack for many, many years. It would be naive to think that they won't have prepared contingency plans for either continuing to operate or resurrecting in a reasonable period of time those underground facilities. I don't know this, but I would assume that they will have multiple routes in and out, that they will have substantial underground supplies, stores, so that they can operate despite the destruction of overground infrastructure. This isn't a new idea. Even at the time of the JCPOA in 2015, this debate was going on about how much military damage could actually be done to these facilities with the weapons that were available. And we just heard that only the Americans have the bunker busting weapons that would be able to take out these deep underground facilities. I don't think we even know that that is the case, that even the Americans could do this with conventional weapons. These are very deep facilities buried under solid rock structures, and will be very challenging for anybody to destroy.
The Chancellor told me this morning that we are moving our assets into place to support our allies. Now, if you were still Foreign Secretary, what would you be, first of all, saying to the Israelis after Mr. Netanyahu's essentially, as you pointed out, direct appeal to the Iranians, essentially for regime change? And what would you be thinking about that phrase, support for our allies? How far could we go?
Well, the UK has been involved previously in purely defensive actions, intercepting incoming missiles towards Israel. Israel has perfectly strong capability to intercept missiles, but of course, these defensive systems can be overwhelmed by sheer scale of attack. And that is why in the past, allies have assisted at moments of peak threat to intercept missiles where there are multiple threats incoming. The UK has capabilities to do that. For example, using our Type 45 destroyers, air defense systems, using air-launched interception systems. We've got an airbase on Cyprus, which is close by. We've got other naval assets in the region, and we've got access to basing facilities of allies in the Gulf. So we have a number of options available to us. I think what the government will be trying to do is ensure that we have options available to us without committing to doing anything at the moment. As this story evolves, and hopefully we move to a diplomatic phase where there is a de-escalation, the UK will be in a position to be able to potentially offer or threaten to use its assets in the region to be part of an international diplomatic solution. Such a solution will be stronger if it is broad-based.
One last quick one, if I may draw on your experience also as a Chancellor. I'm sure the Chancellor wants your advice. She's going to ring you up, but, you know, you can offer it to her via
I'm waiting
us.
by the phone, Trevor, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, you know, we all live in hope. The Strait of Hormuz we discussed this morning, we know that if that route is in any way interfered with, it will have an economic impact. I'm hearing right now that the Deutsche Bank, which is, you know, one of the big players here, think that the oil price could hit 125 per barrel. I don't think it's been there for quite a while, and that would be a major knock to our economic plans. Anything she should be doing to prepare?
What she should have been doing, of course, a long time ago was rebuilding our reserve. It's ridiculous to be running an economy of this size, nearly $3 trillion economy, with a £10 billion reserve in the budget. But she hasn't done that, and she hasn't got that capacity. So if there is a shock, an economic shock, we will be in a much more difficult position in responding to it. What I would just say, though, is I don't think we should get too excited by a short-term spike in oil prices. Markets operate at the margin and react to a situation like this. But it's only if this situation becomes long-term sustained that I think there's a risk that we could see serious economic disruption.
Lord Hammond, thank you very much for your time this morning. Well, back to our panel, Emily Thornberry, Penny Mordaunt, Mark Urban. I think they called him Spreadsheet Phil at one point, didn't they? Spreading calm amongst the panics. Just come back to this issue of what the Israelis can and cannot do. What is your view, Mark, that actually that there's a limit to how much they can degrade the Iranians' capacity?
Yeah, well, Lord Hammond, fascinating there, a former Chancellor, former Foreign Secretary and former Defence Secretary, of course. So I thought he made a good point about is even the American capability, this big bomb carried by their B-2 bombers, which the Israelis don't have, is even that enough for the deep-buried Iranian facilities? I think that's a perfectly good question. So they have obviously, as he says, the Iranians have been thinking about this for 20 years, and so have the Israelis. What could they do? They may mount some kind of ground operation in order to go into some of those facilities. That could be part of it. Once they achieve complete air supremacy over those facilities, they might attempt to go in on the ground and do it.
And they'd lose a lot of men on both sides, wouldn't they?
Well,
and they would be...
very tricky, clearly.
Yeah.
Very tricky. I mean, so many interesting points there in what he had to say. I mean, the one thing I would say, yes, of course, Netanyahu's dyed-in-the-wool opposition to this programme is a matter of record. Yes, he may well have derailed the Trump diplomatic initiative. But on Friday, the Israeli National Security Advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, said this cannot be solved by military means alone. Oh. So even in the Israeli cabinet, I think there is a sense that there will need to be a diplomatic deal to tie this up.
Penny, I'm not going to ask you to divulge any of the secrets of a Defence Secretary's red box, unless you really want to. But what do you make of this? Because it seems to rest very heavily on what is militarily possible. What are the limits of Israeli power and the limits of the Iranian capacity to defend themselves and so on?
Look, no situation you could care to imagine is just going to be solved from a military perspective. And I have to say that a lot of the conversation, I know we're not saying this, but a lot of the conversation this morning has implied that the Israelis, because they can't complete the mission by themselves are wrong to do this. At least they are doing something in response to what sounds like an immediate threat. So I just think we need to bear that in mind. From the UK's point of view, one of the things that we can do with our military to help this situation is to protect shipping. I mean, that will stop a lot of the economic shocks. It will provide reassurances to the market. We've seen in the press a lot about our jets going over. We do have quite a lot of maritime assets in the area. We always have a strong presence in that area. Our carrier group, which was on its way to the Indo-Pacific, went through the Suez Canal about 5 days ago. So they're in the area. That's a destroyer and 2 frigates. And you need that fast ship to keep up with the ships it might be escorting, big tankers and so forth. So I suspect you'll see that's one of the things that Britain can do. We do it very well. And we will just have to look at making sure we're not dragged into a situation, but how we can actually help with some of the unintended consequences that might come from this.
Penny just referred to the fact that we've got a carrier out there. I think it's this one's Prince of Wales, isn't it? But actually, the carrier is just accompanied not just by our ships, but I think by Norwegians, Americans, and so on. How concerned would you be, Emily, about this essentially being spread?
Well, it's obviously always a worry that other nations might get drawn in, but I think that the position of the Americans is pretty pivotal in this, and it's quite difficult to know what the position of the Americans is. I mean, to answer your question that you asked before the break, who's calling the shots? I mean, I've been thinking quite a lot about what Donald Trump has been doing. You know, I mean, first of all, as to say, you know, there's been 20 years really when Netanyahu has been asking, you know, a number of American presidents, you know, can we go? Let's go. Let's take action against the Iranians. It's always been said no, but this time, for whatever reason, the Israelis have done it in the middle of negotiations. And I mean, I made a list of, you know, all the different things that Trump has said in the last kind of couple of days. You know, he started off on Thursday, he was urging the Israelis not to attack publicly. And then he said the Americans have had nothing to do with it. And then he said it's an excellent attack and there's more to come. And then he said expect more talks on Sunday. And then he said with Putin, so, let's walk it back.
Some sort of case of consistency from Donald Trump.
And then all I'm saying is that when you ask a question, who's calling the shots, or when you ask the question, what's going to happen next, normally we look to a leadership from the Americans, and it's quite difficult to know. We also know that he's beginning to get a reputation for not being, I mean, like, you know, this taco phrase, you know, Trump always chickens out, is something that they're saying in the markets. And it's just, we're anchorless and we don't know where it's going to lead because we don't know what the position of the Americans is going to be because the Americans don't know, because Donald Trump doesn't know, which is why I think it's so fundamentally unsettling what's happening at the moment.
I mean, this will have been damaging to Trump's reputation in the region because he's just come back from the visit to the Middle East. The Gulf states that he visited there will not be impressed that this happened on his watch. So he's under pressure there. He's under considerable domestic pressure. His base does not want him to assert himself into this conflict.
They're anti-war, really, aren't they? They wouldn't want to be involved in another one.
They do not want any intervention. But clearly, this is the role that we need America to play. He is now, I think, doing the right thing by trying to push people back to talks and to try and make progress there. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think.
Do you two genuinely, you two probably know the answer to this better than most other people, do you genuinely believe, when the Americans say the Israelis didn't tell us, do you genuinely believe that also means they didn't know?
So with regard to America, I don't think that my personal view is that they would have been aware of this, and I don't think that they would have proceeded without some sort of sanction from, some sort of approval from America.
Would not have.
I think that's right.
From America. I mean, not necessarily that the Americans would have been delighted about it, but I just cannot see that happening.
I mean, your point's very well made about the inconsistencies of the Trump regime. I think it's pretty clear, though, that now he is trying to use this crisis to leverage them back into talks. You know, oh, this can get so much worse, he says to the Iranians over social media. And going to Penny's point about, well, you know, the thing had to be tackled, we must never forget that, yes, after Trump pulled out of that nuclear deal, the JCPOA, widely regarded as a disastrous move, Joe Biden said, I think in the 2020 campaign, that it was his primary foreign policy aim to get them back into it. They weren't interested. Yeah, the Iranians have agency in this too, and they weren't interested in going back in.
Yeah, but hang on, wait. Yeah, but you can't sign an international agreement and then say, oh, we're changing our mind because the leadership has changed. You have to sign it on behalf of a country, and it has to be consistent. That's the nature of international diplomacy and international treaties.
In normal times?
It wasn't a treaty for that very reason.
All right. We have to go to a break now. And pay for the programme. Next, we'll hear from the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Now, let's hear a response to events in the Middle East and the recent spending review from the Conservatives with Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride. Mel Stride, are you glad to see the establishment of a national inquiry into grooming gangs?
Yes, but it's taken too long. The Prime Minister dithered on this. In fact, he became very defensive about not having this proper statutory national inquiry. He accused us, for example, and Chris Philp and Kemi Badenoch and others in my party made the running on this. He accused us of jumping on a right-wing bandwagon. Lucy Powell said it was dog whistle politics. What he said is that you had many years to do this, and you did. We did a lot. We had the Alexis J review. Out of that, we set up a grooming task force that identified and pursued 550 new perpetrators as a consequence of that. We implemented all bar 2 of the recommendations from the Alexis J review. And we have consistently, for some time now, been calling for this national inquiry. So it's good that it's happening. But the problem is, Trevor, if I just finish, we should be some way down the line now in actually executing it. I'm sorry, say again.
The Chancellor says that there are many recommendations that you did not act on.
So we accepted, of the 20 recommendations, we accepted 18 of those from the Alexis J inquiry. But the important point here is, why has the Prime Minister suddenly decided that he's going to change course? Well, it's public pressure. It's the pressure that we have applied, particularly within Parliament itself. This is the kind of behaviour that we've had over the winter fuel payment, where they came out and did entirely the wrong thing, dug in, came up with all their arguments as to why it was completely absurd to do it any other way. And finally, when it's come to public and political pressure, they have caved. And that's not the best way to conduct public policy. And it's certainly not the best way of standing up for those thousands of young people who have suffered.
Mr Farage would claim at least a chunk of the credit.
Let's take what's happened in Parliament itself. So we had an amendment, a reasoned amendment to the second reading of the education bill. Okay. Reform could have put that forward. We were the ones that did that, and Labour voted it down. We tabled an amendment in committee in the policing and crime bill, which Labour voted down on this very issue, calling for a national inquiry. Reform could have done that, but they didn't. And we are the ones that, on the order paper this week, on Tuesday, Trevor, have another amendment that, were it to pass, would force the government to act with a national inquiry within 3 months. Now, that's been preempted by this welcome decision today. But make no mistake, it is the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, Chris Philp, who have been making the running on this.
All right. There is war, again, in the Middle East. Your leader criticised the government this week for not backing Israel's attack on Iran more strongly. Do you think that this attack was the most sensible course of action available to Mr Netanyahu?
On the assumption that Iran are very close to gaining a nuclear weapon, they've enriched uranium now to a substantial degree. They have underground enrichment facilities, as we know. They've been criticised in recent times by the International Atomic Energy Agency that looks over what countries are doing in this space, who have expressed their concerns about what's going on. Then I think it's right that we should be very concerned about that potential situation. So, I think it's important that action is taken.
If the conflict stays live for many more days, and the Israelis ask this, should we make the UK's military assets available to support their operations?
Well, I think it's right that we make sure that we protect our assets, and we have assets in Oman, the UAE, and we have Akrotiri in Cyprus, and I think it's right that the Prime Minister has said that fighter and refuelling planes will be sent into the region to make sure that we do what we can to protect those, given that the Iranians have suggested that they might be threatening them. As to what further action might be taken, I'm not going to speculate on that now. We'll have to see how this unfolds. But the most important thing is we push really hard on de-escalation, that we use our diplomatic offices working with others to try and de-escalate the situation, because the wider ramifications of all of this, of course, could be very, very serious indeed. So it's important that we try and de-escalate.
Let's turn to the spending review. Most people seem to think that there will be tax rises. coming out of this. I think you've said that yourself in your response to the Chancellor. Now, you don't like windfall taxes, you don't like inheritance tax changes for farmers, you don't like the rise in national insurance for employers, and that runs into tens of billions. Where would you prefer to find the money for that gap? If, for example, government would have a change of heart, would you borrow or would you be looking for more cuts in public services? Are you a tax riser or are you a cutter?
No, we're something else. We're an economy growers in the Conservative Party.
Oh.
And now, let me explain this, Trevor.
Okay.
Well, you've not given me a chance to respond, but...
Well, you're just surprised.
Well, I'm happy to follow that up.
That's exactly the answer that I hear from Labour ministers.
Yes, but they don't know how to do it.
We solve everything by growth.
Yes, because they don't know how to do it. None of them have got the kind of private sector entrepreneurial experience on that front bench. There's a dearth of it, and they don't understand business and how you grow an economy. So what we would have done would have been to have taken different fiscal choices. We would not have loaded up taxes on businesses like national insurance that destroyed growth. We wouldn't have talked down the economy to extinguish the animal spirits. We wouldn't have borrowed and spent like it's going out of fashion, which was driving up inflation, keeping interest rates higher for longer, adding to that national debt, the servicing costs on which are £100 billion a year. That's twice what we spend on defence. And you can see the results, Trevor, because her wafer-thin sliver of fiscal headroom has been blown from the autumn, rebuilt in the spring, and most economists say it'll be gone with tax rises to come
I don't want to be rude.
In the autumn.
I don't want to be rude here, but I'm hearing the words magic money tree coming over my head here. I am looking back and thinking, oh, Conservatism were in power for 14 years. How did the growth thing go there? Not very far. Where's it going to come from? Where's this magic?
I was trying to explain. Trying to explain.
No, but
I'm happy to explain if you'll let me explain.
Go on then.
OK. So the first thing is different choices around tax and spending. You don't tax and spend your way to growth. OK, so I think I've covered that. Secondly, productivity. So this government, when they came in, they gave 14% to the train drivers, 22% to the junior doctors. No productivity strings attached. You drive up productivity. And the third thing is welfare. We have a spiralling welfare bill in this country. We demonstrated in office that we could make substantial savings in welfare, £5 billion.
No, you did. No, you didn't.
Yes, we did.
Actually, let me show you. I wasn't expecting to do this, but let's see if we can call up a chart I shared with the Chancellor, which looked at productivity growth over a period.
Well, I was talking about welfare spending just then. I wasn't talking about productivity.
But the point is...
Although I'm happy to.
But the point is, all the time you were in government, productivity fell. It was very poor.
Yes, public sector productivity, which is your bottom line there, has indeed trailed off for some time.
Look what was happening on your watch.
Yes, OK. So that is an alarm bell that tells you you have to lean hard into productivity. And
the alarm bell was ringing for 12 years.
My point, the question you asked me, Trevor, before you flipped your gotcha chart up, the question you actually asked me was how would you have done things differently on coming to office about a year ago? And the answer is you have to, as that graph illustrates, deal with productivity and get it to rise. And what this government has not done is have any clear plan for that whatsoever. So we would have taken different choices, which would have led to a very different situation. And the problem is we've now got a cruel summer of speculation about rising taxes in the autumn, which in itself will be once again another weight on growth and business.
Mel Stride, thank you so much. Sorry we didn't get on to Liz Truss, but thank you very much for your time.
Next time, Trevor. All right, thank you.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Back to our panel, Emily Thornberry, Mark Urban and Penny Mordaunt. Penny, Mel Stride last week, we didn't get to talk about it in our interview, but he made a speech in which essentially he was attempting to bury Liz Truss. Nothing to do with us anymore. Is that credible?
I think it is. I mean, the Conservative Party is under new leadership. They're clearly doing a lot of thinking, deep thinking about the direction to take the party in and to try and create the solutions to the very serious challenges we're facing. I mean, at the time of the mini budget, I got my apology in then, check Hansard, because although there were a lot of factors that contributed to that moment, what she did was one of them. And how can we have credibility with the public if we're not honest about that? So I think he's done the right thing, and I think that, you know, although there was nothing wrong with her ambitions, she was doing things that she thought would support growth. The way that she did it, and that's why having a plan is so important, the way she did it was completely wrong.
Of course, if the Conservatives had chosen a different leader, can't think of who, but things would have been different.
Well, there's no point in looking back, is there? We've got to look forward.
Okay,
I'm
let me
still
interrupt
here
you. Let me interrupt.
Helping
Let me interrupt. If Penny had been selected as leader, and I have to say, I've always greatly embarrassed her by being a supporter of Penny's and thought that she should have been leader. I know. That's all right. Let me just keep saying that. And sorry about that. But it would have been different. I mean, it would have been different with a different leader, I think.
But look, this is fascinating for your viewers, but it didn't help the situation then, and it's not going to help the situation now. I mean, I'm sorry I'm not in Parliament, and particularly on the week we've just had, because I was shouting at the telly more than I usually do. Very disappointed at this spending review. It is, and the key thing, the sequencing of when this review came out. We had the defence review before it, the spending review, which is completely against what normally happens. We don't have the industrial strategy until a little way along, which is supposed to be delivering a lot of the efficiency savings and helping productivity. So this doesn't line up at all, and as a consequence, you can start to see that the numbers don't line up. The efficiency savings that the government is purporting to make are not going to materialise. The only supply-side reforms Labour have are in planning. And for defence, this is catastrophic. The efficiency savings that defence is supposed to make in order to deliver the budget, I mean, we're almost getting to a point where the defence budget is going to be cut as a consequence to that. There's no uplift to defence. And you've had a review that, you know, just a week before the spending review was unveiled, that is claiming this is the first duty of a government is to fund defence. For defence, there was no uplift whatsoever, no plan to get to NATO's floor. And that, I think, is the most grotesque dereliction of duty.
But we're spending £5 billion more this year on defence. We just are. We've said that we're going to increase.
It's you've given an uplift to the intelligence agencies, but it's not for the defence budget, and it doesn't count towards NATO spend. This is a. I'm outside Parliament now, so I can say it's a great big thing.
Just as a matter of fact, the John Healey said, well, the Defence Reviews says 2.6% GDP over in this Parliament. John Healey hinted pretty strongly that they want to get to 3%, but not probably for another 7 or 8 years. The Prime Minister says he wants that to happen.
It's supposed to be a NATO-first review.
Indeed.
And NATO says 3.5 if they can make efficiencies.
That's what they're talking about now. There are efficiency savings projected in defence. By amongst other things, changing light bulbs, I think. But anyway, Mark, defence was supposed to be the big winner here, wasn't it?
Exactly. Well, look, I think they're both right in a way. Yes, they have set out in the 3-year public spending period this path to 2.5%. So yes, that does mean billions more. I think 5 or 6 by the end of that 2027-28. But I was surprised when almost the first thing John Healey said when he stood up to announce it in the Commons was, we're going to make efficiency savings of £6 billion over the next few years. So it is a slight on the one hand, on the other. And then when you look at the savings projected for the NHS, 17 billion, I mean, Lord, these are difficult assumptions, aren't they, to make work out in practice. The knife edge that the public finances are on, and then consider the possibility of an oil price shock, inflationary effect. Extraordinary how hard it will be.
Just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done.
Well, I mean, Emily, actually, I want you to ask about this, because alongside the spending, Rachel Reeves says, in the document, investment must be accompanied by reform. So that means, for example, large savings, several billion a year in the NHS by changing practice and so on. This has always proved difficult for all governments, but also for Labour governments, hasn't it?
I don't know. I mean, it was when we came in 97, that was the mantra then. We're going to increase money going into public services, but we do need to change them. And actually that, we've found, is the way to bring people with us, because it's not, as the previous government did, you know, we're introducing efficiency savings and that's that. We're not going to do that. We're going to do both. We're going to make public services more efficient and we're going to be putting investment into it. And if you can do both those things at the same time, then you can drive change because you bring people with you.
But the thing is, this is not a partisan point.
It is a partisan point.
No, I'm going to make I'm going to make a non-partisan point.
All right, go on.
We love our charts on this show.
But you're the one who said that Labour made it more. It was more difficult for Labour. It absolutely isn't.
Well, OK, but the point I really want to make is, if you look at the chart here, irrespective of who's in, if you look at the bottom red line there, public sector productivity has just declined and declined and declined, and nobody seems to be able to fix this. Yet every time we have a public spending review, there is the promise that we're going to find the money from...
Well, part of the issue as well is that over 15 years, the wages for people in public service has gone down hugely. So, you know, there has been an effort by the government to increase the wages of people in public service, because it isn't just good enough to trade on their goodwill.
Indeed.
And that has an impact on productivity.
And the first thing Rachel Reeves did last year was to give a chunk to the doctors and
absolutely.
I suppose the question I'm really asking is, what will this government do? And this is for all. What can this government do that none of those other governments, including the Blair, Cameron, Brown, all coalition, none of them been able to do?
This doesn't have the focus in Whitehall that it needs. I mean, a classic recent example was right at the moment people were talking about the nation becoming more resilient, and this was going to be a big thing in healthcare, in our civil contingencies. That very same week, which was about a month ago, the NHS stood down the 750,000 volunteers that had stood up during COVID, an army of people willing to do tasks, willing to supplement what the NHS was doing, and they were all stood down. I mean, there are things going on in departments which are completely unfocused on improving the outputs of our public services. And until you get that focus, and it should be the Treasury that's leading on this, you will get crazy things like that happening, which take us in the opposite direction.
Well, the magic answer to your question, what can they do, is AI, isn't it? If you look at the stuff that the Tony Blair Institute and others like that produce, they're saying civil service productivity can be raised big time by that. But
absolutely. And then there need to be hard decisions made. I mean, we need to do the planning reforms.
Okay.
We need to... OK.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in a second, but we'll also talk about grooming gangs. In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them. Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring, an exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News, get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News.
Is the West right, i.e. fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Back to our panel, Emily Thornberry, Mark Urban and Penny Mordaunt. Now, we understand that the Casey review into grooming gangs, what they call the national audit, is due to be released tomorrow afternoon. That's presumably why the Prime Minister made the announcement he did last night that he will support a national inquiry. Emily, they haven't handled this terrifically well, have they?
I mean, I've been looking at it and I'm genuinely confused about it because there was this J review, wasn't there, that was in 22.
Yeah.
And that went on for like...
ICSA, so-called.
So it went on for 7 years or
Correct.
something. It had 200 recommendations. The previous government didn't pick up on any of them. And that, I think, was a review that was national and it was local. So it seemed like it was sort of all singing, all dancing, and it finished in 22. And so now we're doing another one. And so that's why I'm genuinely confused about it, because, you know, and I think I represent people sitting in their homes at the moment thinking, what is going on? Why do we keep having reviews and reviews into reviews and reviews into the reviews of the reviews? And I mean, so when does this stop and what is it that we're missing? I mean, the first thing I'd say is that I think that it is unfortunate in the extreme that none of the 200 recommendations that were made by the J Review were picked up by the previous government, and yet they are now, you know, complaining that there isn't another review going on. But
this is the point the Chancellor made. But to be clear, what we understand that Louise Casey will say, and I haven't seen it, so I don't know, but I do know Louise Casey, and my guess is that this is close to the truth, is that she will say that the Alexis J inquiry did what it did, but it didn't focus on the particularities of this specific kind of grooming, which we all know about now. And the things that it missed were specific neighbourhood factors and the issue of ethnicity of the offenders, and that it is different to most of the other kinds of child abuse that Alexis J looked at. And that's why it needs to be different.
The thing is, Trevor, is that, I mean, I know that she went into it not thinking that we were going to need to have another review, and I know her too, and I hold her in great esteem, and I'm sure that she went in, you know, and was prepared to be led by the evidence. So whatever conclusion she comes to, you know, she's come to in a genuine way. And from what I understand, the idea is, isn't it? I mean, I don't know the reasoning about it is the structure will be there will be a national review, and then that it will help to empower any local reviews
going on.
so that those local reviews that are going on will be able to compel witnesses, which they haven't been able to do before.
Penny.
So look, the most important thing is it's now happening. I always thought it was inevitable and right that it should happen. So good on Louise Casey and everyone who was championing having that national review. But why also the government response matters is because this is a pretty unique set of circumstances where it wasn't just the horror of those crimes and the volume of crimes that took place. It was the fact that the very people charged with looking after those victims and assisting them didn't do their job. We had whistleblowers, and this went on for a very long time. So I think the public interest in this is not just wanting justice to be done. It is wanting to understand that going forward, those agencies and police forces and others, they can trust. And if you have a government that is appearing to not recognise that obvious fact, that doesn't help build that trust. So that's why I hope going forward, we have a different attitude from government, and we have people being on the front foot and recognising that that is what is at the heart of this. Can I just put into the mix here that we do also have a Prime Minister who was the first person to prosecute these gangs. So, you know, let's not run away from reality too much.
The Chancellor made that point earlier on.
Okay.
But I think the question that is being raised here is that. And by the way, I should say that plaudits to some of my journalistic colleagues who have pursued this through thick and thin and exposed themselves to all sorts of unpleasantness because of it.
You included, Trevor, in that.
Well, I'm the least of it. But they've exposed themselves to all sorts of unpleasantness, physical included, by the way, but that actually somehow governments... And by the way, it's probably true to some extent of the last government, but specifically this government has said month after month after month that not nothing to see here, but we've done it all. It's all been the Alexis J report, and then suddenly it's different. I think that's the issue here.
Trevor, but they didn't just say there's nothing else that needs to be done. They actually implied that people who were raising these issues were at fault, and I hope that we can draw a line under all of that, and that the public will see a cross-party support for this important inquiry, and that we can actually start to rebuild some trust with the public about these services that are there to protect very vulnerable people.
Well, I just want to see if Mark wants to say anything about it.
Well, I'm hearing how hard it is to achieve the right solution here when you've got victims who basically will be living through trauma for the rest of their lives and speaking about it. It's very, very hard to bring a sort of easy, settled conclusion to an affair like this. And of course, all the time, while people talk about this, there are political opportunities for the far right, which are exploited on occasion to kind of stir things up again. But I mean, yeah, I guess if this inquiry can take things forward by a big stage, and in that attempt to rebuild trust with social services, police, that's got to be the hope.
I think inquiries like this don't give space for the far right. I know that's not what you're saying, but if you don't grip an issue, if you don't address public concerns, and you difficult though these issues are, if you don't do that, that's what creates.
No, I think you've got to be prepared to grip it repetitively and in an ongoing way. Otherwise, they're in.
Emily?
I think the most important thing that we've seen so far is that there is going to be legislation that will make it compulsory for people in public service who, if they understand that there has been somebody that they are close to, that they have some responsibility for looking after, is being abused, that they will report it and they will take it further, because until now, people have been able to look the other way.
Thank you all very much. That's it from us this week. You can watch Sophie every evening this week. I'll be back next Sunday.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.